So this happened earlier in this year. For a little bit of background, I'm a 30-year-old male, married and was 29 at the time this happened. I also have a young daughter. I live in a very rural Northern California town, pretty much right in the epicenter of the gold rush really. I don't know if it's all the ways the land was taken or the ways people killed for wealth back then, but it's always seemed to have a higher share of strange recluses and those sovereign citizen types. That being said, this is not a haunting story or a strange people of the woods story, but it was by far the most frightening encounter I've ever experienced as a father. Some time ago, I ended up with an extra day off. My wife and I decided to go out for a drive and check out a semi-local gun show. From time to time, I'd get tables at them, and I also had friends who did them regularly as well, so we often went to visit. I was always looking for obscure parts and pieces of old military weapons. I also happened to have some family that lived in the area of this particular show too. We had a hell of a winter last year, so unsurprisingly, it was a very cold, gloomy day. We drove for about an hour and knew the promoters, so we just walked right in. As I was passing by tables in search for the right stuff, I was carrying my daughter in my arms. She was small and ridiculously cute as well, so everyone we passed wanted to look and ask about her a bit. This was pretty normal from what I've observed from other parents. At times, you can even draw a small crowd to yourself, usually composed of sweet LOLs, little old ladies, and some grandpa types as well. As a side point, I had this one grumpy lady tell me she was way too young. I looked at her confused since we were at a gun show and said she was only 3 months old and she'd probably never remember. Anyway, there was this one man who seemed a bit more excited than most others his age. It wasn't particularly weird at first though. He claimed he had worked as an EMT and in an NICU for years, so it seemed reasonable he was happy to see such a healthy baby. As the afternoon went on though, he passed us by several more times, always moving against the crowd. He would comment on how beautiful she was. As babies often do at that age, my wife soon needed to breastfeed our daughter. We went out to the car and had blinders in the back seat, so she could have some privacy and keep the baby from distractions. I turned on the heater, locked the doors, and went back inside to help a buddy sell during a busier point. Only 10 to 15 minutes later, my phone starts frantically ringing with my wife on the other end. About 3 minutes before, I had noticed law enforcement had gotten up and walked outside the show, but I hadn't made the connection at that time. It took a minute to calm her down, but apparently that man had followed us outside and had been watching her very closely. While in the car, my wife got that sudden feeling. You know, that one that makes your hair stand up on end. That's when she saw a shadow standing outside her door, blocking it from opening, holding a small metal tube. At that same moment, a sheriff pulled up, who had also seen us go to the car. The officer approached the man and asked him what was going on. The man tried to say he was talking to my wife, who rolled the window down slightly and said she didn't even know him. The officer asked his name, but when he tried to turn around and run the name through his system, the man tried to run away. Obviously, the man was fake. Once they detained him, he gave his real name. Within 1 minute of calling it in, the man was turned around and immediately arrested. Turned out he had felony warrants out for kidnappings. The man was waiting for the nearby cars to leave. He wanted to try and take my wife and infant daughter. Had that cop not been right there at that exact moment, who knows how this could have all unfolded. Luckily, there was a cop exactly when we needed one. This is going to be a slightly long story, so please bear with me. This is from my sophomore year of high school. Keep in mind that some of the reasons why this whole scenario lasted so long were because I was extremely shy and I was having problems with extreme anxiety as well. One thing I did get out of this whole experience was that it helped me learn to speak up for myself though. It was the beginning of the school year. I had a gym class as my first period. I went to class normally for a few days, but I had noticed at some point that this girl had been staring at me on and off. I really didn't think it was too much to worry about at first. A big mistake on my part. One day before class started, we were all hanging out in one corner of the gym, listening to our teacher's story about how he tripped and fell into a huge puddle of mud and was sitting on a pile of yoga mats, staring off into space, but still somewhat paying attention. I then heard a girl's voice say, "Teacher, I have a story to tell too. I finally found my best friend I haven't seen in years, and she doesn't even recognize me." I snapped out of my staring spell and looked toward the voice to find that she was pointing directly at me. Since I was caught off guard, I foolishly said, "Oh, no, I remember you." I read off the name that was written across her gym shirt, Ellie, because I didn't want to seem like a jerk for not remembering who she was. Ellie instantly brightened up that I remembered her and proceeded to lift herself up onto the yoga mats and sit uncomfortably close to me, close enough that our entire bodies were squished together. I didn't say anything because I didn't feel it was necessary to cause a huge problem out of this. Obviously, something was up with her mentally, and I didn't want to be a dick about that. Class went on, and Ellie and I were not in the same group anyway, so I really didn't have that much of a problem with her that day. The next few days, though, we didn't have any assigned class groups, so Ellie was trailing behind me like a dog. She was starting to get extremely protective and forceful with me. I don't get cold very easily, but she kept insisting I wear her jacket and would not leave me alone until I did so. She started to say things about hurting my actual friends too, which was the final straw for me. "Do whatever you want to me, but as soon as you bring my friends into it, I'm going to do something about it." I was finally going to bring all this up to our principal. Putting that whole thing behind us though, our class today had the option of either volleyball or walking around the perimeter of the room. I decided to just walk around the room, and I've been doing that for around 15 minutes, until I sat on the ground by the bleachers to tie my shoes. Ellie dropped down out of nowhere and watched me with extreme interest. All of a sudden she grabbed my wrist and held our forearms together. Look, see, we have the same veins. You want to know why? Because we were in the womb together. I used to hug you when you were scared in the womb," she said. This line freaked me out a lot at the time. 1, our veins looked nothing alike, and 2, we looked nothing alike either. She was a whole year older than me. I decided to run off to the bathroom before I really freaked out. I stayed in there for almost the rest of class. I did return later for the end of class roll call, and then left to go to the locker room. Ellie apparently got dressed super quickly, because I could see her hiding around the corner just staring at me half naked getting dressed. It made me really uncomfortable. I lied and told her I had to leave quickly, because I had to meet up with my boss at Olive Garden. I hightailed it out of there to my next class. My next class teacher, who I trusted dearly, had called me up to talk to her privately after class. She said Ellie had been talking about me and asking about me non-stop in the class she had her in. She recommended me to go to the police as soon as possible and told me she would talk to the principal. This scared the shit out of me. Just what in the hell had my teacher heard in that time from Ellie that she would tell me to go to the police of all people? I called my mom and skipped the rest of the day. I stayed home the next day as well and went to the police station with my mom. They brought us into a room, and I started off with just telling them the basic story of what was going on. I hadn't even said her name yet. The guy I was talking to just stopped me and said, "Ellie Smith?" I was dumbfounded. How exactly did he know precisely who I was talking about? He went on talking about how she'd been down to the station a lot. He couldn't go into the specifics because she was a minor, though. Obviously, this did not help with my anxiety. Just what the hell had she done that she had to be called down to the station multiple times? The police couldn't really do anything, so the only thing I could do was switch my class. I was pissed off because I'd made a few good friends in that class, and I had to restart with a whole new one. At least now I would be away from Ellie, though. The new class started off fine, but over the course of the year, I started to run into Ellie in the halls constantly. My friend had even seen her turn around at one point when I wasn't looking, and stare at me with one of those terrifying faces that give you chills. She would start to yell things along the lines of, "I'm going to get you." This was extremely unnerving, of course. I didn't want her near me or my friends. I began stepping up and telling the vice principal directly whenever one of these instances occurred. She continued to stalk me over the course of my entire sophomore year. I was hoping she would forget about me, because I had figured out we had never actually met before that gym class. I had never hung out with anyone other than my friend Paige in the time Ellie said we were best friends. I even checked all my yearbooks, and not a single one mentioned an Ellie Smith. The morning of the first day of junior year, I ran into her before I even started my first class. I tried my best not to make eye contact. Later that day, the principal called me in and told me that Ellie said I had done a lot of things which I didn't. I hadn't even had the courage to look at her. This began a whole game with threats and random incoherent screeches that continued throughout my junior year. I felt like an entire part of the high school experience had been taken away from me because I spent so much time trying to figure out how to avoid this girl. Thankfully, because she was older than me, she graduated earlier and was gone during my senior year. This whole experience has honestly both traumatized me and helped me grow as a person, though. I learned how to assert myself more than I've ever done before. But I swear, sometimes when I'm out and around, I feel like I see her out of the corner of my eye, or like she's watching me from somewhere. It's caused some paranoia that still hasn't gone away completely. Oh, also, I've forgotten to put that at one point she had my phone number I gave her. When I didn't think anything was wrong yet, I apparently wrote down the wrong number, thank God, and she tried to call me like 100 times. She got very angry and kept repeating she was going to stab me if I ever did that again when I saw her in class the next day. So 2 years ago, right around the time of Halloween, I was babysitting for these two ladies who each had a son. They wanted to go out that night, so I stayed at one of their houses and offered to watch their boys for them. It was around 8 p.m. or so, and the boys were sitting on the couch playing with their iPads or whatever. At this exact moment, somebody knocked on the door. I asked both of them if anybody was supposed to come over, and they both said no. I crept over to the door and checked the eye hole. I could see some guy in a gray hoodie, deliberately hunched over so I couldn't see his face. Immediately I was sketched out and didn't say a single thing. I started pacing around because I didn't want to give him any inclination we were inside. A couple of minutes later, I check outside the little window through the curtains just to make sure, and I see he's gone now. I didn't want to spook the kids anymore, and there weren't any other knocks either, so I kind of just let it go as a prank at first. Cut to a few hours later, and the moms get back. They ask me how everything was, and I say the kids were great, but some person had come to the door during that time. They ask me what time they came. I say around 8, and one of the moms starts freaking out, going through her phone. The other one tells me that right around that time, somebody had begun making strange phone calls to them from a blocked number. They had disguised their voice and were saying things like, "I can see you through your window right now." They didn't think it was serious because it didn't make sense in the context of where they were. But in retrospect, we were almost positive it was me he was looking at through the window that entire time. They escorted me to my car, and I touched base later. Apparently, nothing strange ever happened after that either. I'm really glad I didn't decide to open the door to see what that guy wanted, because I have a gut feeling it would have been really, really bad. To start off, I'm a 16-year-old female. Okay, so I was visiting my mom's apartment for the weekend with my sister. We go there every weekend or every other weekend to see her. We arrived at about 10 in the morning this day and brought in our pillows and movies or whatever from my grandma's car. We got inside and chilled there together for a couple of hours, watching TV, before my sister said she was hungry. "Alright, what do you want?" my mom asked. "Pizza," was the answer. I said I was okay with having pizza as well. My mom said she would have to run over to Kroger's, which was less than a mile or so away. She also said she would like to get some movies from Redbox as well. My sister asked if she could go with my mom down to the Kroger's. My mom agreed and asked if I would be fine in the apartment all by myself. I said I would because I was mature enough to be on my own. "I'll be gone 20 minutes tops," my mom said. She really didn't like leaving me alone, but she thought it would be fine. It wasn't going to be for that long after all. Now, my mom's apartment is kind of in a crappy neighborhood. The kind of crappy where sex trafficking people have been spotted, drug dealers, thieves, that kind of stuff. I was on the 3rd floor though of one of many surrounding apartment buildings, with tons of neighbors around at the time. I was sure it would be fine. "Okay, sweetie, lock the door and don't open it unless it's me." You know, the standard stuff. They left soon after that and I was sitting there on the couch, on my phone with Jerry Springer playing in the background. It was about 10 minutes after they had left, when I heard the doorknob begin to jiggle. I looked up, not feeling scared right away, but also feeling a little bit wary. I should mention I carry a pocket knife everywhere with me, and the blade is about 3 to 4 inches long. It was sitting there on the coffee table in front of me when I got up to go to the door. I'm only 5'3" and I knew not to open the door for this person, so instead I grabbed a chair and stood on top of it to look through the peephole. That's when I nearly shit my pants. On the other side was some random Mexican guy I had never seen before, just standing there trying to open the door. Of course, being how I am, I tried to laugh myself out of being afraid. I had no reason to think this man was going to do something to me. I mean, maybe he had just stumbled upon the wrong apartment or something. I had never seen this man before, and I didn't know everyone in the building personally, but I'd seen all of them at least once, and this guy I knew did not live there. "Hey, man, I think you got the wrong room," I called out through the door. He froze immediately, his eyes glued to the door handle. Then he looked up at the peephole. He could probably tell exactly where I was when I spoke. I swear we made eye contact. The whites of his eyes were so yellow I thought he must have had jaundice. All of a sudden, he started ramming his shoulder into the door, like full-on shoulder ramming in football. I jumped off the chair and grabbed my phone and knife and ran into a room with a window to lock the door. I called my mom's friend who lived in the apartment building across the street and started crying hysterically into the phone. "Jess, someone's trying to break in. Call the cops. Bring Chris. Get over here quick." She didn't even hesitate. Within seconds of hanging up, I called my mom as well. The guy was still slamming on the door, yelling in frustration now that he couldn't get it open. My mom picked up after a few rings. I told her what I had told her friend, and that her friend was coming with Chris and she needed to get here quick too. All she said was, "I'm coming." By the time I saw Jess make her way down 2 flights of stairs and across the road with her boyfriend, my mom was flying down the road. Everyone there within mere seconds of me calling. They all raced inside, and I could hear shouting and yelling in the hallway. I unlocked the door and peeked out to see what was happening. I saw Chris holding the man against the wall, while my mom hugged me. Jess was screaming at the man as well. Long story short, the police arrived and took my statement. The man first denied everything by saying, "I thought it was my room." He ended up confessing though that he'd seen me around before and wanted to come talk to me because he thought I was so pretty. The police officers had him in handcuffs and ran a background check on him, and what came up was not surprising. He had a warrant out for an assault charge on a woman and had been arrested for child molestation and kidnapping as well. Yeah, we didn't exactly sleep well that night. This is a fresh, brand new story, as it just happened yesterday. So, I was on my way back home from the city center at around 9 or 10 p.m., and I had this sandwich with me. I have to take this bus to get home with maybe 16 stops until I reach mine. My stop is not exactly a busy stop. Usually it's only me and sometimes one other person who gets off there. I hopped onto the bus at the back door, and the minute I sat down, this drunk guy came up to me and asked if I speak Hungarian. There are relatively a lot of beggars around this area, so I wasn't exactly surprised. I said no, a lie, so I could avoid further conversation. He then started speaking to me in English though, and asked if I could give him some money for food. I told him no, and that I didn't have any Hungarian currency on me right now. Again, a lie because I just wanted to eat my sandwich in peace. This guy then proceeded to demand I give him a piece of my sandwich and almost broke one off himself. I said to the dude, "Sorry dude, no offense, but I just want to eat my stuff in peace. Please leave me alone." At first, he seemed pretty chill about it, but this is when it got interesting. He sat back down in his seat about 3 seats behind me, and I noticed immediately he was not alone. He was with 2 equally drunk other gentlemen. The bus now closed its doors and started on its trip. As I was sitting there eating my sandwich, I can hear these guys talking shit about me in Hungarian, assuming I didn't understand it. It was shit like, "Man, this dickhead won't even give me a piece of his sandwich. What a prick. Dude, I want to bash his head in with a glass. I'm so angry." I could hear them agree on getting out at my stop so they could beat me to death. I had never had to deal with a situation like this before, so I started to think of what I could do. I came to the conclusion that my best option was to get out at my stop and run home, but not down the usual route. I thought I could pretty easily outrun 3 30-year-old extremely drunk guys. Meanwhile, because I was focused on what to do, I didn't even touch the rest of my sandwich. This got them even angrier though. "Dude, look, this guy didn't even finish his sandwich. I bet he gets home and just throws the rest in the trash." Then one of them said he murdered someone in one of his dreams. The other one said he dreamt the same thing too, and this must not be a coincidence. I wanted to believe that surely they couldn't be that barbaric over a simple sandwich, but I was wrong. I heard them discussing my height, my weight, my buffness. They all came to the agreement that they could easily take me 3-on-1. At this point, I was sweating. I was thinking about other options because my stop was very quickly coming up. We were heading into the suburbs, and the bus was starting to get empty. Then I realized I could just pretend to get off somewhere else and hope they got off too when I decided to do that. At the last relatively busy stop before mine, I stood up and went to the front door, where 4 other people stood waiting to get off. The bus stopped and I started to head towards there, but stopped when they couldn't see me anymore. Surprise, surprise, they got off thinking I had done so as well. The men then started walking back over to where I was standing calmly, because there were other people at the stop as well. When they got to my door though, luckily it closed shut. When we finally arrived at my actual stop, I checked to make sure that nobody else got off with me. I think this could have gone so much worse. I was lucky to get the best case scenario. And yes, I did eat the rest of the sandwich once I got home safely. I've always wanted to share this with other people, but I could never quite find the right place. For reference, at the time this all began, I was 14 and a freshman in high school. This was back in 2008 or 2009, so not particularly recent. It all began during the first couple of weeks of school. I went to this school district all my life, and I'd never had any real issues. I had no enemies really, only friends. It all began one Friday afternoon after school. I was hanging out with friends outside of the school until my mom came to pick me up. I decided to go upstairs to my locker and put a textbook away that I was originally going to bring home for the weekend. When I got up to it though, I noticed there was a note taped onto it. My name was written on it with a heart surrounding it. I read the contents of this note. It was a love letter signed by "Your Secret Admirer." I thought it was a friend playing a prank. I laughed it off and tossed it in the trash. When I confronted my friends downstairs though, they denied that they'd put a note on my locker and insisted it probably was actually from a boy who liked me. I didn't know what to think really. but I did think of a few cute guys I went to school with. I hoped it was from one of them, but I sighed and thought it could have been almost anyone. Most likely none of them. 2 months went by since this day. During that time, we'd had a school picture day, and my mom had ordered some. They were eventually given to us during one of our classes. I kept them in my locker so I wouldn't lose track of them. It was a Friday night, and I was going to stay after school with friends again and hang around until the high school football game was over later in the evening. I waited until about 2 hours after school ended or so to grab my belongings out of my locker, including those photos. I put them in my backpack and headed on outside. I hung out around the football field with my friends until people started showing up for the game. At that point, we walked around or sat in the grass and talked for the rest of the evening. When I got home that night, I gave my mom the collection of photos when she noticed that one of the wallet-sized ones appeared to have been cut off from the rest. I had never bothered to look at all of them, so I hadn't been aware this was the case. I told her it really wasn't me that had cut one of them off, but she really didn't believe me. I didn't know what to think. A few weeks went by and I all but forgot about this missing photo. I did find another note taped onto my locker though, and this time one of my school photos was in it with a heart drawn around my head, a wallet-sized photo. The note made mention of how beautiful I looked during the game, sitting with my friends in the grass talking and laughing. Now I was uncomfortable. Whoever was doing this had stolen one of my photos, either out of my locker during school, which meant they had my combination somehow, or while I had left my backpack unattended during the football game. Once again, I assumed it was one of my friends just playing a prank on me. I didn't say anything about it. It had been several months since the last note after all. Things took a rather stressful turn the following week though. I was at home after school one day alone, while my mom was working a double shift, when someone came knocking on my front door. Thinking it was a pesky neighbor, I took my sweet time to answer it and opened up the door, only to find nobody there. I looked around outside, but I couldn't see anything but other mobile homes and neighbors' cars. I shut the door and resumed what I was doing. I heard the knocking again about 10 minutes later. I took my time again to answer it and found Mike, one of our only friendly male neighbors. He was standing there with his Boston Terrier on a leash. He asked me if I had somebody over, which of course I did not. He then told me he had seen somebody snooping around my home a few minutes ago. I felt uncomfortable. I asked him who the person was, but he said he had never seen him around before. I thanked him and locked all my doors and windows after he left. The next month was full of incidents where our motion sensor backlight would come on in the evening. It was capped off by my mom calling the police after she found a dead rabbit nailed to our back porch in a rather cruel fashion. Now, at the time, I would never have imagined that those notes, the snooping around, and now this dead rabbit were the work of someone who had been stalking me in the shadows for months. But it all came into fruition the following day at school. This day, I found a final note taped to my locker. I could see there was a big bulge in it, and when I began to open it, the foot of a rabbit fell onto the floor in front of me. I shrieked in terror as a teacher came running up to me. I pointed out the bloodied rabbit's foot. He picked it up and asked where it had come from. I showed him the note, and we immediately went to the office and showed the vice principal what we found. Later in the day, I was called into the office and found my mom there with the principal and vice principal. It was there that I had to recount the events over the last couple of months for the first time to anyone and give the names of the students I thought may have been responsible. They asked me for any suspicious interactions I'd had through social media or in school, but I'd never noticed anyone that seemed off to me. They told me if anything were to happen again to let them know, and they'd get the police involved if my life appeared to be in danger. My mom had already contacted the state trooper who visited our home the previous night about the rabbit's foot being found in my locker at school and how a student may have been involved in this incident. From that day onward, nothing else major happened. About halfway through my junior year, though, I noticed another love letter. This time, instead of it being written by hand, though, it was typed out and signed, "Your secret admirer from freshman year." I had all but forgotten about what had happened during that time. I kept this note and gave it to the principal, who kept it as evidence in case things ever escalated again, but luckily they never did. Nothing else ever happened afterwards, at least nothing that was particularly obvious to me. I also never found out who had done all this in the end. My junior year of college, I moved into a large house with 4 people on the first floor, 5 on the second, and 2 people upstairs who we didn't really talk to. This house was very old, but it seemed normal enough at first glance, at least until I went down to the basement for the first time. There was this washing machine and dryer down there that never worked, so we had no real reason to ever go down there except for parties. The weirdest part of this room was towards the back of the basement. It was always locked, and it always gave me an overwhelming sense of fear anytime I even got near it. Apparently, when my roommates had first moved in, that room was not locked. One of the girls had been looking around in there and found several human teeth and what she described as strange tools. Not too long after that, the landlord, who had only just recently purchased the property, locked up that door, and it had never been opened since. Fast forward a few months, I had recently woken up from a nap and was cooking some food on the stove. I was the only person there on our floor. Suddenly, the hallway light to my left turned off with no warning. I shrugged, assuming the light must have burnt out on its own. Then though, it turned back on. The light switch for that light was on the stairwell on the other side of a closed door. So I waited for a minute, only for the light to turn off by itself again. I ran over to the door quickly and threw it open, thinking someone had to be fucking with me. But no one was there. I walked downstairs. There was nobody on that floor either. Now I was a little freaked out. I still just told myself though it must be an electrical problem or something. I go back to making my food. Immediately the light turns off and on again. I kinda stood there for a few seconds. Then music started to play. It was coming from the living room, which was right next to the kitchen, out of sight. Now I was feeling relieved, thinking someone must have been home after all. I walked out into the living room, only to see a closed laptop, sitting on a ledge near the window, connected to some speakers. The television was on one of those static channels, just like in the movies. I slowly walked toward the speakers when I realized the laptop had been turned off. I unplugged them, and the music stopped. I really wish I could remember what song was playing, but I obviously had other thoughts in my mind in that moment. That was when the chills sunk in. I turned off the stove, walked down the stairs, got in my car, and drove away. A few weeks later, I told my roommates about what had happened, hoping someone would confess to the very elaborate prank they had just pulled on me. Instead, though, every single person got kinda quiet, and each one by one, started admitting to weird shit that had happened to them too. One of the girls claimed that she would often wake up in the middle of the night and hear noises coming from inside her closet. Sometimes the hangers would move around like someone had just bumped into them. Another friend said he often heard weird noises, like footsteps above him. When he walked upstairs, though, nobody was home. Another guy told us he had woken up in the middle of the night to see a dark figure standing right in the center of our kitchen, staring into his room, before it walked into the stairwell and disappeared from his sight. A little late to the thread, so this might not get too many reads, but I'll post this anyways. So, when I was 7 or 8 years old, I went over to a friend's house after school. My friend's house was located on a relatively quiet street and had a large backyard surrounded by woods. Well, my friend and I decided it'd be a good day to build a tree fort. We'd build it out in the woods behind his house. We rounded up some of the necessary tools and brought his little brother to tag along as well. Some background to the story. There had recently been some daytime coyote spotting in the area, so we were nervous already to begin with. I even remember discussing with my friend and his younger brother our plan to smash any attacking coyotes with a hammer. In retrospect, that probably wouldn't have worked too well, but like I said, we were all very little kids. As we were walking along the path out into the woods, I can vividly remember looking down at the trail while walking and conversing with my friend, when all of a sudden my friend's younger brother stopped dead in his tracks and remained standing there motionless. Before I even knew what was going on, I noticed my friend also stop suddenly, so naturally I did the same. I looked up to see just what it was that was frightening them. I can still very clearly remember this image. I could see in the middle of the woods there was this older woman, I'd guess mid to late 70s if we had to say an age. She had this waving, curly grayish white hair and was dressed in a white gown. She was roughly 25 yards ahead of us, just standing there. She wasn't moving, completely motionless, not even looking at us, but rather directly through us, if that makes any sense. I still get the chills even thinking of that image now, but it's still so clear in my mind. What I'm about to say next might seem like a little bit of a stretch, and it was more than likely my imagination getting the better of me. However, I swore there was like a faint aura of white around the woman. My friends and I have also since discussed this incident, and they too described some sort of light radiating off of her. After standing paralyzed for what seemed like several moments, we watched as the woman slowly raised her right arm and pointed the direction in which we'd come and started walking slowly towards us. Almost immediately, just like a scene from a movie, we all screamed and dropped our tools, nails, and pieces of woods for the treehouse. We sprinted back towards my friend's house. All of us frantically told my friend's mom what we'd seen. But to no one's surprise, she just dismissed it as childhood imagination. We're all now over 20 years old, and we're still in agreement that we saw a glowing white-haired woman dressed in a white gown in the middle of the woods that day.